Hello there, welcome back to Cells and Diffusion Part 2. This is Lesson 10, Unicellular Organisms, and we are getting pretty close to the end there, so keep up the good work. But if you want to pause the video really quick to get started on the 8 questions of the Do Now, and then we'll go over them together. Alright, so let's start off with number 1 here. State how you can sharpen the image. So let me just make these red before we get started. Alright, number 1, state how you can sharpen the image. So for this one, you can either use the fine focus or coarse focus, okay? And those are the two dials that are on the side of a microscope. Oops, sorry, coarse focus. Those are the two dials on the side of the microscope that you can use to lower and raise the stage. Alright. Number 2, state the names of the two types of microscopes. These are going to be your electron and light microscopes. Okay. Number 3, state which microscope you would use to look at mitochondria. Okay, so this one, mitochondria, as you remember from before, you could either use a light or microscope. A light or electron microscope, but I would use an electron microscope for the purposes, just because you can see a lot more detail on the mitochondria if you were using a electron microscope. If you use a light microscope, you would probably just see little dots, and that's it. And number 4, for that reason, electron microscopes are much more powerful, and we can see the mitochondria in better detail. Okay, excellent. Number 5, state the organelles of an animal cell. So there are 5 major organelles that we talked about in lesson 8, and those are the cell membrane. Okay, and remember, I'm not going in any particular order here, so just you don't need to memorize them in this order. Mitochondria. Let's go ribosome and nucleus. Okay. Again, I'm not going in any order here. As long as you know the 5, that's all you need to do. Number 6, state which organelle coordinates the cell. So again, going back into those organelle functions that you need to memorize, right? And the nucleus is the one that is kind of the brain, quote unquote, brain of the cell. Number 7, state which organelle releases energy in respiration. So energy, you should think of the word powerhouse, and the powerhouse of the cell is the mitochondria. Okay. And number 8, if the eyepiece is 10 times magnification and the objective lens has 40 times magnification, what is the total magnification? So if you remember from before, to get total magnification, all you have to do is multiply the eyepiece magnification and the objective lens magnification. So 10 times 40 would be 400 times total magnification. Okay. Alright, so please make sure that you have all those answers ready to go, and we will get on to the main lesson here. Right, so today's lesson is going to be on unicellular organisms, and I'm going to explain a little bit about what that is as we go through the lesson. But if you know your words very well, you know that uni means one and cellular means pertaining to cells. So when we go through the lesson, I'll try and make sure that you understand as much as you need to, because this lesson unfortunately doesn't have a lot of information in it, which means that today's lesson will be quite short. But that being said, please try and pay attention as much as you can, because you will be visiting this in much more detail as you go into more higher level science. Okay. So we're going to start off by talking about bacteria cells, okay? On line 2, it starts off by saying that bacteria cells are much smaller than plant and animal cells. So in lesson 8, we looked at animal cells. Lesson 9, we looked at plant cells. And now we're going to look at bacteria cells. And the first thing that you're going to notice about bacteria cells is that they are very, very small, okay? That means that we can only use an electron microscope to look at bacteria just because of their size. All right? If we use a light microscope, we probably either would not see anything or they would just look like dots. Okay. The next part says that they are prokaryotic. This means that they do not have a true nucleus containing DNA. I'm going to hold off on explaining what prokaryotic means for now, just because I want to explain what eukaryotic and prokaryotic are at the same time. So if you want, you can just highlight this for now, all right, and then we'll come back to it in a little bit. They have a singular circular strand of DNA that is found in the cytoplasm. So just like animal and plant cells, bacteria cells, so I have a picture right here, they do have a cytoplasm, and it's labeled right here, and it refers to all this pink area right here. Okay, all the pink inside. So inside that cytoplasm, you can find a single strand of DNA. Okay, a single strand of DNA. And like I said, you don't need to know too much about this for now, but it is important to know that bacteria DNA and, for example, human DNA look very, very different. Okay? They look extremely different. They also contain a circular strand of DNA called plasmids, and plasmids are these ones right here, the circular ones. Okay? And once you get into the higher level science, you're going to learn how these plasmid DNA and the bacterial DNA will actually make sense. But I guess just for now, if you know that plasmid DNA, if you get a bacterial infection, these plasmid DNAs are the ones that actually invade your body. Whereas the bacterial DNA, this is how the bacteria is going to reproduce. Okay, it splits itself into two, and you're going to have this DNA in both bacteria that come out from it. They don't have chloroplasts, so I'm starting up in line 5 again. They don't have chloroplasts or mitochondria, as you can see. And some bacteria cells have flagella, so I'm going to have you underline or highlight this word right here, which enable bacteria cells to move. So this right here, these 3 long pink strands right here, are the flagella. Okay, now you might notice the name says flagellum, and that's just because flagellum is singular and flagella is plural. Okay, so they're actually the same thing, just singular and plural. And it also has a note saying that they're not always present. Okay, and that's pretty much all the parts that you need to know of a bacteria cell. And I just wanted to make a note here that when it says that they don't have chloroplasts or mitochondria, you might think, well, then how do they get their energy? Okay, so bacteria are very unique because they don't produce their own energy. All right, there's actually many different types of bacteria. Some obtain energy by decomposing organic material or by stealing it from another organism. And this is the reason why a lot of scientists have trouble identifying bacteria as a living thing, because they don't do one of the 7 life processes, which is respiration, right? So bacteria is one of those exceptions because every other thing about bacteria labels it as a living thing. It's just that they don't have a way to produce their own energy, but they do need energy in order to survive. So that's one of the more unique things about bacteria that you may not have known, okay? And you might notice another huge part is that they don't have a nucleus, right? So they don't have a nucleus where it would contain all the genetic material or the DNA, and they don't necessarily have that quote-unquote brain to tell them what to do, all right? So I'm going to show you a clip of some bacteria cells here and see how they move around, see how that flagellum is being used, okay? So basically it just kind of whips around, and that whipping motion will help the bacteria move in the direction that it needs to move in, okay? All right. Moving along here. So next thing we're going to talk about is these things called amoebas. Now you might have heard of an amoeba before, and again, I'm not going to go into such huge detail, but while we're on the topic of unicellular organisms, okay, amoebas are single-celled living organisms. And what that means is this is one cell, all right? And this one cell is all that it is, okay? Whereas if you look at humans, all right, we're not made up of one cell. We are made up of actually trillions of cells, okay? And so what we're called, humans are referred to as multicellular organisms. And if you look at the word multi meaning many, cellular meaning cells, so many-celled organism, okay? So amoebas only have one cell, and that's it. That's all you need to make a living organism right here. All right, so here's that term eukaryotic. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you to highlight this, and if you want to put this next part on the annotations. On the side here, or if you want to scroll up and put it near prokaryotic, that's fine. I don't really mind where you put it, as long as you have the notes. Okay. And here's the definition of eukaryotic. This means that they do not have a true nucleus containing DNA. So, what is the difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic? If you are talking about a eukaryotic organism, then you are referring to a living thing that has DNA that is enclosed inside of a nucleus. So where my mouse is right now, I'm pointing at the nucleus, and the nucleus, like I said, is kind of like that brain of the cell. And all the genetic material is contained inside here. So you wouldn't find any DNA outside in the cytoplasm or in a vacuole. You'd find all the DNA inside the nucleus. But if you look at a bacteria cell, all the DNA is inside the cytoplasm. There's no nucleus here. Okay, so that's the major difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic. Eukaryotic has a nucleus, and prokaryotic does not have a nucleus. All right, and so this means that most of the organisms that you know of are eukaryotes. All right, so when we refer to an organism that is eukaryotic, then we call them a eukaryote, and then same thing for prokaryotic. If it's a prokaryotic organism, then they're a prokaryote. And this is a system of classification that helps us identify, let's say if we found a new species, the first thing we would identify is it prokaryotic or is it eukaryotic? And if it's prokaryotic, you can bet that it's an extremely small organism because it's typically unicellular. Okay, if it has many cells, then it will generally be eukaryotic because just to have that many cells and no nucleus can't exist. All right, so prokaryotics refer to most bacteria and viruses, whereas eukaryotic will be everything but that. Okay, so hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of what prokaryotic and eukaryotic mean. I know right now it doesn't seem like it has much importance, but I promise you when you get into the higher level sciences, it will make more of an impact and why it's so important. All right. And the last thing we're going to look at is this weird green shaped thing called euglena. Okay, so euglena is, let's read it out. Euglena form an interesting group of unicellular creatures since although the majority are plant-like in their feeding, a few feed like fungi, some like animal. Okay, and I'm going to explain why. Let's just highlight this part right here. And if you wanted to draw an arrow from this plant-like feeding all the way down to chloroplasts, okay, this is the reason why they feed like plants, because like I mentioned in my last video, humans don't really need chloroplasts because we can get energy from the food that we eat. So we don't have chloroplasts, whereas plants, they can't obtain food as easily as we can, so they need the chloroplasts to get as much energy as they can from the sun. But that being said, they do have a lot of other spots that allow them to feed like animals. Okay, nearly all of them possess characteristics which make them more like animals than plants. Unlike green plants in general, euglena does not have a rigid cell wall and can change its shape as it swims along through movement, though movement is affected by lashing of the flagellum. So again, here's that long tail called the flagellum, which whips around, that allows them to move in different ways. But really the chloroplast is a dead giveaway, noting that euglena do feed like plants sometimes. All right, and the fact that it's green is a little bit of a coincidence, but that's not the reason why. So there's your euglena there, and here's a short little clip of euglena and how it moves around at different magnifications. So you'll notice that again, if you're looking at a low magnification, you can't really see anything except these little rods moving around. But if you zoom in a lot more, then you can see quite a bit. The flagellum isn't very visible, although you can see something whipping around here and there, and that's going to be the whip-like shake. Okay. All right, so after we've watched all that, next is going to be the exam style questions. So if you scroll through the next couple pages, there's lots of questions that you can answer. A majority of them are actually quite simple, okay? But I would like you to take the time now and answer as much as you can of the exam style questions, and we will get to these afterwards. Okay, so you can pause the video right now. All right, so before we go on here, I would just like to remind you that these questions here, even though they say exam style questions, they're not meant to stress you out or anything like that. Very often, these booklets are made so that they add in a couple questions that are exactly the same on assessments. And so that's why I would like to take the time to go through this, because if you see a question on here and you see it on an assessment, even though you may not remember how to solve it, you might remember what the answer is. And so I would like to give you as much chances as you possibly can on assessments to score as high as you can. So I'm going to try and guide your thinking the way that I would do it if I were taking this assessment. So question 1. The diagram below shows an organism called Euglena. It is made of only one cell. It lives in ponds and streams. Euglena have features of both plants and animals. So the first thing you want to do with every question is read out everything. So you're looking at the picture here, and it has a membrane. It has cytoplasm, it has chloroplast, it has a nucleus, whip-like flagellum for movement, and a reservoir for taking in small particles of food. And the question asks, give 2 pieces of evidence that suggest it is an animal cell and not a plant cell, Okay, so let's start off with the obvious one here. So think back to all the pieces that differentiate between what is a plant cell and what is an animal cell. So the first one, hopefully that comes to your mind, again, I'm going to make this in red, is that this Euglena, I'm just going to write here. Euglena does not have a cell wall, okay, which is something that all plant cells have. So there's our first one, okay. The next part here, another piece of evidence by looking at this diagram, is that it has a reservoir for taking in small pieces of food. Plants, on the other hand, don't have anything like that. Okay, they actually absorb things through diffusion, which is what we're going to look at next lesson, but that's something that doesn't seem very common in plants. Okay, whereas plants and animals, they both have a nucleus, they both have a cytoplasm, and chloroplast, you're going to try and ignore that because you're looking for evidence that suggests it's an animal cell, not a plant cell. Okay, so we're going to say it has a reservoir for taking in food, which means it can feed. Okay. And another answer that you could have put there is that it has a flagellum. Okay, and again, you will not find a flagellum in any plant cells whatsoever, but animal cells, they do need to move around quite a bit, so that could be another one that you could put there as well. Okay. All right, part B here. Plant cells carry out photosynthesis. How can you tell from the diagram that Euglena can carry out photosynthesis? Okay, so look up here. How can you tell that this organism right here can undergo photosynthesis? What is a major clue that is linked with photosynthesis? Okay, and hopefully you looked at the chloroplast, okay, because chloroplasts are the main organelle that helps any plant undergo photosynthesis. Okay, so let's write that down. Okay, it has a chloroplast, which is the site of photosynthesis. Perfect. And question number 2 is, this diagram shows an animal cell and a bacteria cell. Not a lot of it is labeled, but that's part of the question, right? Structures A and B are found in both the animal cell and the bacteria cell, so structures A and structures B. Okay. And use the words from this box. You have 4 words: cell membrane, chloroplast, cytoplasm, and vacuole. And you're to use the box to name the structures A and B. Okay, so part A is pointing at the gray area. All right, and out of these 4 words, that would be your cytoplasm. Okay. And part B is pointing at the kind of like the skin area, so the outer layer of both of these cells. All right, so this one is going to be your cell membrane. All right, so A is cytoplasm, B is cell membrane. And part 2 is asking both cells contain genetic material. Okay, so genetic material right here, although in the animal cell it's not pointed out. So let's see where we're going to go from there. Name the structure in the animal cell that contains genetic material. So I guess basically it's asking, what is this large dot right here? Okay, and again, it's not a word in here, unfortunately. So if you use one of these words, you are going to be wrong. And the answer for this one is going to be the nucleus, right? The nucleus is where all the genetic material is contained inside of an animal cell. Okay, so that's question 2 right there. Oh, and it looks like we have a bit more here. All right, so list A gives 3 structures found in animals. List B gives 4 functions. So draw one line from each structure in list A to its correct function in list B. So basically you have 3 structures, I suppose. Okay, and in part B, or list B, you have 4 functions. So basically you just have to link whichever function it's connected to. So the cell membrane, that is responsible for controlling what substances enter and leave the cell. The mitochondrion, or mitochondria for plural, is responsible for respiration. And finally, the ribosome is responsible for protein synthesis. Okay, protein synthesis. So there you have it. There's your 3. Okay. And we're on to question 3. So this drawing here shows the cell of a bacterium. Right? You have 4 parts. You have the cell wall, you have cell membrane, you have chromosome, and cytoplasm. If you didn't catch what chromosome was earlier in the video, because I did just write it out, pause, or you can go back to that part of the video right now just to kind of check and see if you can answer this, because if you had problems with this, you might have had problems with the question itself. But if you didn't, let's move on quickly. So again, you have 2 lists. List A gives the 4 structures, and list B gives information about each structure. So again, you're supposed to draw one line from each structure to the correct information in list B. Okay? Alright, so let's see if I can fit everything in there. Alright, so first of all, you have the cell membrane. And so same thing as last one, cell membrane controls the passage of substances in and out of the cell. The next one is going to be the cell wall, and the cell wall is responsible for strengthening the cell. Next one is cytoplasm, and the cytoplasm is where most of the chemical reactions take place. And the last one is chromosome, and chromosome is where there are genes. And if you were wondering, this last one here helps the bacteria move. That one would be a flagellum, or flagella, if you want to use a plural term. Okay, perfect. So there you have it. There's your 4 arrows right there. And we're going to keep moving along. And here's the last part. Give 2 differences between an animal cell and the cell of a bacterium. So this one is hoping that you know exactly what an animal cell is and what a bacterial cell is. Okay, so let's start off by looking at this picture of a bacterial cell. Okay, so the first thing that you would hopefully recognize is that this doesn't have a nucleus. It doesn't have that dot. So the first difference that you can put down is that the bacteria cell does not have a nucleus. Okay. Whereas an animal cell does. Another difference that you can put down is that the bacteria cell, this bacterium cell, however, has a cell wall. Okay, this one has a cell wall, and we know that animal cells do not have cell walls. That's more of a plant feature, or plant cell feature. So that would be the second difference that you can put there. I know it's not listed here, but we did learn earlier that bacteria cells do not have mitochondria or chloroplasts. So that could be another answer that you can put down, is that bacteria cells do not have mitochondria. Okay, so I'm going to move back down here, and let me put down the answer. So animal cells have a nucleus, where bacteria cells do not. And the next one that you can put down is animal cells contain mitochondria, where bacteria cells do not as well. Okay. So there you have it. Please make sure that if on an assessment, if you had put animal cells have a nucleus, bacteria cells do not, and then put bacteria cells have genetic material in the cytoplasm, animal cells have it in the nucleus, that would only be worth 1 point because you're basically listing the same thing twice. Okay, so just be careful there that you're giving two very distinct differences. All right. And there are your exam style questions. Now, as I mentioned before, you may or may not find these on an assessment, so make sure you pay close attention to questions like these in any booklets, for that matter. All right, and now we're down to the knowledge check questions. And before you get started, I do want you to skip questions 8 and 10 because it was not mentioned in the booklet at all, and I don't think that this is a very important thing for you guys to know at this point. So just skip questions 8 and 10, and we're going to go through everything else in the knowledge check questions. So pause the video now and get started on those, please. All right, so let's go through these knowledge check questions, and then that's it for today's lesson. So number 1, suggest which two cell types contain a nucleus. Well, we only know 3 types of cells, and one of them doesn't have it, and the other 2 that have a nucleus are plant and animal cells. Okay. Number 2, state a similarity between bacterial cell and an amoeba. You could say that they are both unicellular. Okay. Or sorry, I should put that in full sentence. They are, they they are both unicellular. Number 3, define the term eukaryote. So eukaryote means has a true nucleus that has DNA. Okay, or you can put has DNA inside a nucleus. So a prokaryote would be an organism that does not have a nucleus, or I should say true nucleus. Okay. I should switch this to an organism that has a true nucleus. Number 5, suggest whether animal cells are prokaryotic or eukaryotic. So from the definition above, you know exactly that animal cells do have a nucleus because that's one of the 5 organelles that we learned about, so that means that they are eukaryotic. And number 6 wants you to explain why or how you know that. That's because you know that animal cells have DNA that are enclosed inside of the nucleus. Okay. Number 7, state the name of the structures that enable bacterial cells to move. So this one, you could either put flagellum or flagella. Okay. Either or works because they're both the same thing, just singular and plural. All right, moving on to number 9. Suggest the function of the vacuole. So the vacuole in plant cells are kind of like storage units, as you remember. So I'm going to put to store food like cell set. Number 11. Explain why amoeba are classed as animals and not plants. Okay, so there's a lot of different reasons that you can put down for this, but as long as you have one of the following, I wouldn't be too upset about this question if you got it wrong. So amoeba can move around, they can reproduce, let's see, and obtain their own food. All right. You could also put that they don't have chloroplasts, and that's kind of the underlying message with obtaining their own food, is that they don't need to have chloroplasts to obtain energy and stuff like that. All right, and then moving on to number 12. State two differences between euglena and bacteria cells. So again, lots of things you can write down, but I'm going to just point out the two obvious ones, is that euglena have mitochondria and a nucleus, which are the two biggest differences that you see between the two different types of cells. All right, bacteria cell has neither of these. And the last one is suggest the name of the structure that surrounds the bacteria cells. So this one is going to be a cell membrane. And if you had put cell wall, I will accept that as well, because they're both very similar in their purposes, except that the cell wall will help strengthen the cell. Okay. And there is lesson 10, unicellular organisms. All right, thank you for watching.